Hey everyone, it's Tracy Martirana here from Holistic Wellness with Tracy. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I wanted to do another herbal spotlight because I really want to talk about basil. If you are lucky enough to live in growing zones 10 and 11, then for you, basil might be a perennial. But for the rest of us, it's an annual, and we can really only enjoy great fresh basil during the summer. And since it is summer here, my basil out in my herb garden is doing great. So if you also grow basil, you probably look out in your herb garden and see these giant herb plants, these big healthy basils, and you wonder, what do I do with it? Basil is a culinary herb, so obviously we want to cook with it. When we think of the flavor of basil, and I should preface this, we're talking sweet basil, Italian basil. There are other basils out there. There's Thai basil, lemon basil, holy basil, which isn't really a culinary plant at all, but we have these other options. But today I'm really talking about sweet basil, Italian basil, the basil that when you smell it, you just think Italian food. Right? I want to add this to tomatoes and eggplants and bell peppers. I want to put it on salads. I want to do all kinds of stuff with it because that's just what it's good for. That's where it shines, when it's fresh and added to other fresh ingredients. So to cook with it, if you are doing anything even remotely Italian-ish, add basil. It'll be delicious. I love to use basil in caprese salad or to top a pizza. I use it in tossed salads. I use it on so many things. I make pesto, and that's actually a video that will be coming up. I have that on my to-do list to make pesto pasta salad soon, using a bunch of pesto made from my basil. But like I said, for most of us, where basil is an annual, we have to replant it every year, and we can only really enjoy it during those summer months. So what do you do with it? What do you do with your harvest? You make dried basil. Now, if you've cooked with dried basil and fresh basil, that you know these two ingredients aren't really interchangeable. If a recipe calls for fresh basil and you substitute dried basil, you'll be disappointed. They're not the same. They taste very, very different, but they're both great in their own particular ways. I've mentioned some of the ways I like to use fresh basil, but dried basil is my favorite go-to herb when I'm making eggs. I know, right? Eggs and dried basil, great combination of flavors there. So whether you're making scrambled eggs or fried eggs, sprinkle on just a little bit of dried basil and it really elevates the flavor and makes it delicious. I also love dried basil in any sort of like chicken noodle soup, or well, in my case, it's just noodle soup because I don't eat chicken. But I make like a brothy soup with onions and celery and carrots, and I add in some poultry seasoning to give it that chicken noodle flavor taste. Really, it's just the sage. But then I add in a little bit of dried basil, and again, elevates the flavor, just makes it taste delicious. So don't poo-poo the dried basil, give it a try. But let's come back to fresh. Like with all of the culinary herbs, basil is not just for cooking. It has strong, big herbal goodness. And we don't want to let that go to waste. So we are going to talk about how you can actually use basil for something other than cooking. Let's start with the herbal properties. First of all, just like many of the culinary herbs, basil is great for the digestive system. If you're suffering from gas or bloating, diarrhea, constipation, basil can help. Basil is also high in antioxidants, again, just like most of the other culinary herbs, which means that it helps prevent aging and aging-related illnesses like cancer and arthritis. So that in itself is a good enough reason to make sure you're getting basil into your diet. Just like many of the other culinary herbs, it's antimicrobial, which means that it is good for killing bacteria, viruses, even fungus. Therefore, it can help fight cold and flu. You can use it in cleaning products as a mild disinfectant in your kitchen. I actually like to use either basil or thyme to make almost a tea to clean my wooden cutting boards, because again, I don't want to clean my wooden cutting boards with anything chemical, but sometimes, I'm always a little bit afraid that it might have been contaminated with something and could use a little cleanup. So that's a mild way of cleaning your wooden cutting boards. And lastly, it's anti-inflammatory. So if some of your digestive upset is coming from inflammation into the digestive system, then eating or ingesting basil could be helpful. It also is good for inflammation in your nasal passages. So if you're fighting cold and flu and you're having some issues with your sinuses, maybe you're congested, everything just feels, when everything is inflamed and you're just like, I can't really breathe well, then basil might be something you want to try. So knowing the herbal properties of basil, you might be thinking, okay, well now what? Other than making something to clean my cutting boards, what can I use it for? First of all, eat it. Put it on everything. Chop it up. Just adding fresh basil or really any fresh herb to a dish just elevates it, makes it feel fresh and yummy. So just take basil leaves, chop them up, add them to everything you're eating. Okay, maybe not everything, but you can add it to a lot. One of my favorite quotes is actually from Hippocrates. He was like, if you're not familiar, I'm sure you've heard of Hippocrates, but he was like an ancient Greek physician. But there is a quote that is attributed to him that says, "Let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine thy food." I think I got that right. But eat it. That's the best thing you can do. Second best thing you can do is if you're having maybe that congestion from cold and flu, basil and maybe even basil and oregano, those two things together, making a steam. So taking a pot of water, put the fresh herbs in there or even dried if that's all you have. Let the water heat up so that it's steaming. Take the pan off the fire, move to a table, be careful so you don't burn yourself, but take a towel, create a little hood, breathe in the steam with the basil and the oregano oils in it, and that will help clear your sinuses and decrease the inflammation. And lastly is drink basil tea. Now I know that sounds kind of odd, but I promise you it tastes better than it sounds. And I love basil. I love the taste of it. I love the smell of it, but I don't necessarily want to drink a tea that tastes like fresh basil tastes. And oddly, when you make basil tea, it doesn't really taste exactly like fresh basil. It tastes a little bit different and in a good way. It's actually very enjoyable. I simply take some leaves, either muddle them or rip them up just to sort of expose the center, to increase the surface area, to expose the essential oils of the leaves. And then I add hot water and let that steep. And the hot water will just pull all that herbal goodness out of the plant, and then strain it off and drink it. It's really perfect for any time, but especially if you are suffering from cold and flu, if you feel something coming on, or maybe you're having some digestive issues and you want to get a little more soothing basil in. So maybe your digestive issues mean that you don't really want to eat a big Italian pasta dinner, but you want the benefits of basil. Basil tea is the best way to take it. I also encourage you to visit my blog post on basil. I will link that down in the description box below. There I get into a little more detail about growing it, harvesting it, drying it, just things you might want to know if you want to grow your own and then use that bounty to sort of fill your spice rack for the winter. And lastly, I just want to give you a quick disclaimer that I always do, especially when I make an herbal video, because more is not always better. Basil is considered to be a pretty safe herb, but anything can be unsafe if you take it in crazy quantities. So when it comes to taking something like basil, eating with it just, in your foods in normal amounts. Don't just eat a whole basil plant. That would be weird. And drinking the tea, 2 or 3 cups of tea throughout the day is usually plenty. There's no need to drink, gallons of basil tea. When you drink too much of anything or eat too much of anything, you're just asking for trouble. You're asking for stomach upset. You're asking for maybe some other side effects like headaches. Who knows? So use common sense and don't go nutso and, try to consume a pound of basil because I said basil's good for you. Also, it's possible to be allergic to anything, including basil. So if you're not really familiar with basil, you don't use basil a lot, just pay attention. Make sure you don't have any symptoms of allergies, like a food allergy. If you do, call 911. Allergies can be serious. We don't want to ignore symptoms. And overall, if you're really trying to heal or treat something, maybe consider talking to your doctor. If you have prolonged diarrhea or upset stomach over and over and over again, there might be an underlying cause that basil isn't going to help. You might need to address a more serious issue. So pay attention to your body, use common sense, talk to your doctor, all of those things. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, maybe leave me a comment. Doing these things lets YouTube know that people are interested in content like mine. Thanks so much. Have a great day.